Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. And the title of today's episode, The Space Where Miracles Happen, is also the title of a program we have coming up in the fall, if you're listening to this in anything like real time. And you can learn more about that program at michaelneill.org/miracles. But for the purposes of our time together today, I want to just start with a question, which is, what constitutes a miracle? In other words, is it only a miracle if it was written about in a holy book, in a sacred text? Or does your definition, your understanding of miracles extend to things that you have actually experienced in your own life? I personally have always really liked the line that's attributed to Albert Einstein, that when you really take a look at life, you either need to treat nothing as a miracle or everything as a miracle. Now, for me, where I've gotten to in that sort of question or exploration is that a miracle, as I describe it, is anything where we can't point to a specific cause. So it's an effect without a cause. It's an effect where our hard work or somebody else's hard work would be insufficient to bring about the result that we're hoping for, or the result that has happened. So if a doctor, if a surgeon operates on a tumor and removes the tumor, we can say, well, yeah, the fact that that person no longer has cancer isn't a miracle. It's the result of the skill and the technology that the surgeon was able to employ. But if somebody has an inoperable tumor and that tumor disappears, well, we would call it a miracle. Not because there is no cause. I don't know whether or not there's a cause, but because there's no obvious cause. There's no human cause. There's no behavioral cause. And so when you start looking at a miracle as something that happens out of proportion to our efforts, then you start to realize that so much of life is made up of the miraculous. There are so few things in life that are actually down to our hard work. Now, there are absolutely some, but so much of what we value in life, falling in love, those extraordinary moments where we completely outperform our skill set, those amazing moments where we just know exactly what to do, where we couldn't possibly have had enough data or experience to know exactly what to do. Even something as simple as the body itself, that we know how it works observably, but we don't know how it came about. We can choose a theory. We can say, oh, well, evolution. Oh, well, God did it. But whatever our theory, it is a theory. And there is something miraculous about the fact that without thinking about it, through no fault or effort of your own, your heart is beating right now, and blood is pumping through your body, and you are alive. So while some of these miracles, it starts to become, well, is it meaningful to call everything a miracle? I don't know that you need to call everything a miracle, but I think it's really helpful to notice how much richer life is when we make room for miracles. And I've come to see in my work, I went through, when I started my work, I saw so many miracles. I saw people who had lifelong fears and then one day the fear was gone, who had eating disorders, and then one day the eating disorder was gone. In fact, I actually was asked at one point, I was contacted by a television production company about being in a show about curing eating disorders. And I thought that was interesting but odd. And when I asked, they said, oh, well, you know, I've got a friend and you helped their daughter, and I knew who they meant. And then two of her friends had eating disorders, and then they cleared up when they read your book. And I was very moved and I was very excited, and I would have loved to be on the show, but I had to be really honest and say, I never even talked about eating disorders in those books. The fact is, what actually happened, as best I understand it, is there is a space in us where miracles happen. There is a space in us where we are able to go beyond logic, beyond rational thought, and something completely new can occur to us. Something completely new can occur for us. And so the only thing I know how to do is to point people toward that space. I can't make a miracle happen. I can't predict which miracle will happen. But it doesn't surprise me when people report miracles happening. And as best I understand it, there are two things that seem to be pretty consistently present in that space where miracles happen. And the first is new thought comes. A whole new way of thinking about occurs to somebody. We spend so much of our lives in habitual thinking, and well, this is just the way that it is. But it happens all the time that suddenly the way that it is turns out not to be. And we see somebody completely in a new light. We see a situation completely differently. I remember when my daughter first wanted to ride roller coasters, she was terrified. And all day we tried to get her to go at the amusement park on, kid coasters and things that we thought she would feel comfortable on. And she couldn't do it. She was so scared she wouldn't even, she'd start almost crying as we got close to the line. And then I watched a miracle happen. At a certain point, I just saw a different look in her eyes. And she said, I want to ride that one. And it was the scariest roller coaster to my mind in the whole park. It was one of those ones where you're kind of like Superman, and you're actually horizontal and you're suspended in space. But it just didn't look scary to her anymore. And that kind of miracle happens because thought can change in an instant. And when thought changes, our reality changes because we live in a thought-created reality. Another level of miracle, another thing that seems pretty consistent, is what I would call a shift in consciousness. Where if you think, now this is just a metaphor, but if you think that consciousness, it's almost like at different levels of consciousness, we experience life differently. And at higher levels of consciousness, we have a sort of a bird's eye view of things. We see what's going on in greater detail. We get a sort of a God's eye view of life, and life looks very different. And so often, accessing the space where miracles happen comes about because of not so much a new thought, but a shift in consciousness. We start looking at life from a different place in us, a quieter place in us, the space before thought, the space within, the space of meditation. These are all different phrases pointing to that space in us where things are not fixed, where reality can change in a heartbeat. Because at that level of consciousness, the form dissolves back into the formless, and transformation, a change in form, can happen. And probably the most common metaphor for it is a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. No amount of working out in the gym is ever going to turn a caterpillar into a butterfly. The form is so different, and yet we know that it's just a different expression of the same thing. And we can liken the shift in consciousness that happens, the space where miracles happen, as being like the cocoon, where the caterpillar becomes the butterfly. And I always think of my favorite cartoon about caterpillars and butterflies, where these two caterpillars are walking along the road and they see a butterfly fly by, and one of them turns to the other one and says, "You'll never get me up in one of those things." But for us, no matter how caterpillar we feel and how logical our plans and approach to life, if we are open to miracles happening, we start being surprised at how often they do. Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll talk with you soon.